All right, welcome back in. It's the Zach Gelb Show on CBS Sports Radio. Now we're going to talk some NCAA hoops. Michigan the other night gets the big 99-72 victory over Texas A&M, and now they'll get set later on this evening to battle up against Florida State with another trip to the Final Four on the line for John Beilein squads. Let's head out to the West Coast and welcome in the play-by-play voice of the Michigan Wolverines for their men's basketball team. And that, of course, is Matt Shepard. Matt, it's Zach Gelb here on CBS Sports Radio. Thanks for the time, and how are you?
Good, Zach. How you been?
Well, I'm doing great. I know you're in a great mood now because Michigan is 40 minutes away from going back to the Final Four. But let's first recap the massive victory over Texas A&M, which was a complete drubbing, 99-72. What stood out to you the most about that one?
Well, the shooting. The Michigan's ability to space the floor continues to amaze most, and their shooting was unbelievable. You shoot 62% for the game. They had 21 field goals made against Houston. They made 20 in the first half alone against Texas A&M, who was fancied themselves a pretty good defensive team. So obviously their ability to get back on track with their shooting eye, but their defense continues to amaze. This is a team that's given up 63 points per game. The previous 5 teams before Texas A&M had shot or scored 63 points or fewer. So this is one of those Michigan teams that we haven't seen very often from a defensive standpoint. Offensively, yes, humming along most of the year. Otherwise, you're not shooting close to 50% from the floor. But overall, defensively, the best that John Beilein has possessed, no question. Michigan led 39 minutes and 3 seconds of that game. That game was tied for 57 seconds, Zach. And then Michigan led the rest of the way. This was a no-doubter, and I thought it was one of the more impressive wins they've had all year.
And that's where I started in the first half. You guys outscored A&M 52-28, and we all know the exuberant victory you had last week over Houston. And not saying they were tight in that Houston game, but you want to see how a team will play coming off such an emotional win. You had a few days to digest it, but just the confidence of this group right now is at an all-time high.
Well, not just the 52 points in the first half. Sometimes it's a difficult thing to repeat, When you build a 20-plus point lead at this stage of the season against these quality programs, these are tough things to continue. And Michigan scored 44 points in the second half. And quite honestly, if John Beilein keeps his A players in there, they score more than that. But, the Houston game, I still think this, and it's not an excuse. Beilein will never say it. Players will never say it. But I do. I think the long layoff between the Big Ten tournament in New York, in which Michigan was just cooking with gas until the time they picked it back up, I think it affected this team. I think it affected its offensive rhythm. Defensively, it didn't affect it because that has held them together all season long. But I think offensively, it played a little bit of a factor in why they struggled offensively a little bit against Montana and Houston. And I think this is a team that now has its rhythm back, and I expect it to continue.
And from an outsider's perspective, I think you're dead on, just because we all looked at Michigan saying, all right, this is a team that could get to the Final Four, but you were curious to see how they would respond coming off the layoff from the Big Ten. And now we know that they're 40 minutes away from going back to the Final Four, as we're talking to the play-by-play voice of the Michigan Wolverines, and that, of course, is Matt Shepard. By the way, what was A&M doing the other night? Trash talking when they were down 20 points. I didn't get that one.
Yeah, I don't get it. I don't get it. Maybe that's just, I don't know if it's false bravado, Zach. I don't know if it's what teams do or individuals do because of where they were born and raised and feeling like, that's something that, they got to convince themselves to a certain extent. I don't know why you want to do that to a really good basketball team. So obviously you didn't watch enough tape on Xavier Simpson. Xavier Simpson's one of the best on-ball defenders, I think, in the country. And he had a career-high 6 steals the other night. Look at what he's done against the opposing point guards over the last few weeks of the season. And these are good point guards, right? Cassius Winston led the nation in three-point shooting, and Xavier Simpson locked him down. Glenn Watson, Nebraska, really good player, and Xavier Simpson locked him down. Jordan Bohannon, really good three-point shooter for Iowa, and Xavier Simpson, when he was on him, locked him down. Rob Gray, right? Guy had 39 in the Houston first-round game, but he took 22 shots to get 23 points, and a lot of those points with somebody other than Xavier Simpson on him. The best thing to do when you're facing a talented team and a team that is locked in defensively, keep your mouth shut and go to work. That's why Michigan has that saying, right? Do more, say less. Texas A&M could have learned from that.
When you look at this team and what they're doing right now in the Wolverines, and you look at this group knowing what you knew about them going into the year, and obviously when you win the Big Ten, all eyes are going to be on you and people are going to expect you to make a deep run in March. But when was the moment this year that you said, this team's a little bit better than I expected with the Wolverines?
Well, let's clarify. I don't know how many people expected them to make a deep run in March, because
Exactly.
There were a couple of times, right? There's a game in which they lose at Nebraska by 20, but I'll be honest with you, I think that's a scheduling loss. They were playing their third game in 6 days. That's an NBA-like schedule, so I kind of threw that one out the window. When they lost to Northwestern at the Rosemont Horizon, now the All-State Arena, a lot of people started to question this team, okay? And I felt like this team was one of the top 4, top 5 teams in the Big Ten all season long. I figured it would be Michigan State and Purdue. I thought Minnesota would be in there because of their experience, but I didn't anticipate, the suspensions that they had and some of the injuries. But I think Michigan, if you look at the track record of John Beilein in this program and how players get better, I figured they'd be right there. Did I think they'd win the Big Ten tournament? I can't say for sure I would, because you got to beat Michigan State for a second time. You got to beat Purdue for the first time. Nebraska was playing for an NCAA tournament opportunity, right? I mean, people got to remember, at the end of the regular season, Michigan's playing some really meaningful games. I mean, Penn State felt like they had a chance to get to the NCAA tournament, and Michigan goes into State College and opens up a can on them, all right? They go to Maryland. Maryland's playing on senior night, and Michigan owns them by 32 at one point. They're playing Iowa and trying to beat them for the third time this season. That's not an easy thing to do. Nebraska in New York. Nebraska's playing for an NCAA tournament bid, and Michigan handles them with ease. Michigan State's got revenge on their mind in a possible 1 seed in a region, and Michigan takes care of them by double digits. And then Purdue was playing for a number 1 seed. They ended up with a 2, but they were playing for a 1, and Michigan took care of them. So the Wolverines have played with a lot of moxie down the stretch. They played some really important games, I think. If there's a turning point from this season, it can be difficult to figure out. You talk to some guys, and they think it's Ohio State when they lost. They blew a 21-point lead, and they learned from that, right? But I think it still goes back to the first game against Michigan State at Breslin Center. They're the only team to beat Michigan State in East Lansing. I think they showed an awful lot of bravado in that game, and I thought that really turned the tide for this team for the rest of the season.
Talking to the play-by-play voice of the Wolverines of the IMG Michigan Sports Network. That, of course, is Matt Shepard, is my guest right now on the Zach Gelb Show, CBS Sports Radio. Let's get to Beilein. We all know how people classify coaches. Many people put Beilein in that very good or even very, very good category, but are skeptical to call him great. And he's been to a Final Four, but people are looking for him to win the championship. We've seen that in years past before Jay Wright of Villanova got that championship. Very good coach, but can't call him great yet. How about the job Beilein has done since you get to be around him a little bit more than we do?
Yeah, look, I think, and I'm part of it too, and I think I'm just as guilty. I think we in the media kind of talk out of both sides of our mouth. We want to say a guy's got to win a championship to be great, but then we look at Eric Spoelstra with the Miami Heat, and we don't consider him a great coach in the NBA, for example. Jim Boeheim's considered this almighty coach. He's got 1 championship. How many does it take for you to convince? John Beilein's got 797 wins, Zach. 3 more, he's got 800. That's exclusive company. He's been here 11 years in Ann Arbor. He's got a school record 246 knockouts. He's 16-7 with Michigan in the NCAA tournament. He's 23-12 all time in the NCAA tournament. I'm not sure what it takes for people that can use the word great, even though I think it can be oftentimes overused. Here's what I look at. John Beilein is one of the best communicators in basketball. He is by far the best teacher that I've seen in any sport at any level. Guys respond to him. Guys get better. They go over fundamentals on a regular basis. I'd love to see him get that elusive national championship. I don't think it necessarily makes or breaks a coach. Obviously, it puts him in a little bit of a different stratosphere. But I talked with Leonard Hamilton today, the Florida State head coach, and he says, John Beilein's a Hall of Fame coach. His guys get better. He's learned. He's adapted. He's changed with the times. He listens to his players a little bit more. He gives his assistant coaches a little bit more freedom. Too many people think he's only an offensive-minded coach. You look at the way this team has played defensively this year, it shows you the types of changes that it takes, and he's 65. When you're willing to change in your profession after accomplishing as much as he had, that can be a lesson for all of us to learn.
Do they talk a lot about last year's Sweet 16 appearance and losing to Oregon by 1 point? They don't mention that at all?
Nope.
Why do you think that is?
Don't mention it at all. Because this team, and look, this is a cliche, but I'm going to say it anyway, okay, because cliches are oftentimes very true. They literally take it a game at a time. I mean, they literally say they're not getting too far ahead of themselves, because that's when you fall into problems, and that's when you start taking teams lightly. They do not look back at all. They do not say would have, should have, could have. They don't even look back at 2013 when Louisville had their championship stripped and said Michigan should get the championship. No way. They're not going to go that far. They're worried about Florida State first, then they'll move on. All they care about is this weekend.
It's tough not to love a player like Mo Wagner. Just give me a little bit of an insight on his progression from where he's grown over the last 3 years of this Michigan program.
Yeah, he's a lot better rebounder. I think, as I mentioned, I think a lot of these guys are a lot better. I think, Muhammad Ali Abdur-Rahman has become an incredible clutch shooter. Xavier Simpson, people forget, didn't play a ton of minutes a year ago, and he's been a much better player. Charles Matthews still has to work on his dribble a little bit better. He's a much better player than he did at the beginning of the season. Duncan Robinson's one of the best stories, I think, in college basketball. As a Division III player to get a scholarship for a Division I program and go from a guy who all he do was spot shoot, now being able to deck and drive it, and more importantly, be a very good defensive player, that says an awful lot. And Wagner's the same thing. I mean, he still has some work to do inside and be able to defend a little bit better, but rebounding-wise and I think basketball IQ-wise, I think he's grown quite a bit in his days at Michigan.
All right, let's spend a minute or two talking about the game coming up later tonight between Florida State. You break down this matchup. What stands out to you about both these programs, and what do you think the keys to the game are?
Well, this Florida State team loves to run, okay? I mean, this is a team that really gets up and down the floor in transition. They're 14th in the country and 19.5 points per game in transition. So Michigan's got to be very careful there. They're a long team, all right? But Michigan's faced long teams all season long. They faced Purdue. They faced Michigan State. They faced Penn State. They faced Texas. They didn't have much of an issue with those teams. If Michigan's able to spread the floor, if they continue to shoot the ball the way they have been recently, like Duncan Robinson and Charles Matthews, Mo Wagner, Muhammad Ali Abdur-Rahman, I expect Michigan to be headed to San Antonio. I do think experience helps, and Michigan's got some guys, especially their head coach, who've been in this situation before, but I think transition defense will be vital. Michigan's really good in that regard. This is a team that has the number 2 defensive transition team in the country. Teams are only scoring 7 points per game against them in transition. I think that will be a major factor tomorrow night.
Yeah, I always look at pressure this time of the year and how these young kids respond to pressure. Last night, Villanova down 6 to West Virginia, and then they close out that game. They come back earlier in this tournament. We all know the 16 seed that defeated Virginia. Right. You look at a Miami program, didn't respond greatly to pressure. And now if you look at that left side of the bracket, you have an 11 and 2 9s, and the Michigan sitting there. They're going to be a favorite in every game they play, depending on who the championship game is. In this game, and then hopefully another game for your sake, how does Michigan respond to that pressure? Does it get to this team?
Well, I think pressure is kind of self-induced, and I think Michigan feels the same way. I mean, you would never know that. I think we on the outside look at it as pressure. They look at it internally as opportunity, enjoyment, excitement, anticipation, goals that they set out from day one. I don't think this team has played with feeling like there's a lot of pressure at all. I think the pressure, I think that word, that P word, that pressure word comes from you and me and other reporters who are asking them about it. I don't think players look at it that way. I think they love this opportunity. This is what they've lived for their entire life. Why would they look at it as pressure? They've been building for this. They've been preparing for this for their entire lives. I think they look at it with excitement and great opportunity.
All right, that's the play-by-play voice of the Wolverines on the IMG Michigan Sports Network. That, of course, is Matt Shepard. You can follow him on Twitter, @ShepMatt. And, Matt, I'll end you on a curveball here because my brain sometimes moves in a different and odd direction. Why is it not Matt Shep on Twitter instead of ShepMatt?
Because it was already picked up by somebody else.
They put that sheet in front of me, and that was the first thing that jumped off. Like, why isn't the Twitter not Matt Shep? Hey, Matt, enjoy the call. Have a good one. We're rooting for you. Thanks so much.
All right, Zach. Have a great weekend, man.